What is going on YouTube and Diablo 4 fans? It's Lanfear here from Lanfear's Diablo 4. Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we are going to be looking at another build guide and do some theory crafting, and there's a bit of a change up here, and that is that I have decided to not start the Diablo 4 launch with a sorcerer or sorceress anymore, and I've decided to go with a druid. And the reason for that being, more importantly than anything else, is that I'm looking for a character that has the ultimate build diversity. And I think that the druid has the most diverse skill tree and allows you to do some really powerful builds, with a lot of them being comparable and viable. So I think with the sorcerer or sorceress, there were only a couple builds that I could think of that would really shine in the end game, where with the druid I believe there will be more diversity in how you can spec and build your character when it comes to the end game. So with that in mind, I've been looking at some other build guides and theory crafting on my own, and one of the builds that I sort of came up with, as well as looking at other builds for reference and ideas, is a Landslide Druid. So this is an Earth Skill Landslide Druid, and we'll just jump into the skill tree here, and I'll show you how to spec out your skill tree for endgame for this Landslide Druid. So starting out, we are going to pick up Storm Strike. So this is a great generator skill, a basic skill. So one of the best things about this skill is that after dealing damage with it, you gain 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds, and this also chains up to 3 surrounding enemies. And once you pick the upgrades for this skill, it also has a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies, which is very important to this build. And with its other upgrade, it also has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable. So for a lot of druid builds, I think this is going to be the go-to basic skill. So moving on to the basic skill, that will then allow us to go to our core skills, and being a Landslide Earth based build, Landslide is what we're going to be maxing out. So you'll put 5 points or 5 ranks into Landslide, and basically what this does is crush enemies between 2 pillars of earth, dealing a lot of damage. And we will then select the upgrade Enhanced Landslide, which after Landslide damages enemies 4 times, the next hit will immobilize enemies for 2 seconds, or 3 seconds, excuse me. And again, immobilize is very important for this build, and we'll be working around that quite a lot in our skill tree here. Then lastly, and probably one of the most important upgrades for Landslide, is Primal Landslide. And when you immobilize or stun an enemy, you gain a Terremote, and each enemy hit by Landslide consumes a Terremote, causing a guaranteed critical strike with 40 times or 40% more critical strike damage. And bosses always have up to 10% chance to grant a Terremote when hit. So what this is going to do is, whenever we immobilize enemies, so for instance with our Storm Strike or some other skills that we have, we will gain these Terremotes, and these will give us guaranteed critical strikes with increased critical strike damage on our landslides. So we're going to be working on immobilizing enemies as much as possible and gaining as much uptime on critical strikes as possible with Landslide. So later on we'll pick up more passives, as we've firstly pick up the other skills that we need. But in this node of core skills, you'll put 1 point or 1 rank into Heart of the Wild, and that is just to get to Wild Impulses, which mean that our core skills cost 9% more but deal 15% increased damage, which is a perfectly fine trade-off as long as we have enough spirit generation. And then Abundance, which means that our basic skills will generate more spirit, so that is our Storm Strike. And you'll put 3 ranks into Abundance, 3 ranks into Wild Impulses, and 1 just to get there through Heart of the Wild. Then moving on to your defensive skills, you're going to put 1 into Earthen Bulwark. So Earthen Bulwark is an incredibly powerful defensive skill, and this has a 16-second cooldown and will surround us with rocks which grant us a barrier that absorbs 45% of our base life in damage. And with that, we will pick up the enhancements of this, and Enhanced Earthen Bulwark will make us unstoppable, which will break any crowd control effects on us and just give us an extra escape, basically, and not to be CC'd and get killed in that way. And then Preserving Earthen Bulwark will give us 18% of our base life in Fortify, and Fortify is also another very important mechanic for this build. So we'll just put 1 point into Earthen Bulwark and then 1 into either of its, or these 2 enhancements for it. So moving down, when you have spare points after getting all your different skill slots, you'll put 2 points into Ancestral Fortitude to gain some non-physical resistances, so against all elements and things like that. So moving down to your companions, we are going to put 1 hard rank into Poison Creeper, and what this will do is, besides its poison damage that it does periodically to enemies, it will also, when activated, immobilize all enemies in an area for 2 seconds. And again, using this immobilize effect guarantees us our critical strike chances with Landslide through its terror motes. So this will be providing a lot of terror motes for us using the Poison Creeper. Then we'll pick up 2 enhancements on that, which is Enhanced Poison Creeper, which the immobilized duration is increased by 1 second, and then also Brutal Poison Creeper, which means our critical strike chance is increased 20% against enemies strangled by Poison Creeper. So again, playing into our critical strike chance on this build. Then once you have leftover points after picking up all your skills, we'll put 3 into Nature's Reach, which will give us 9% increased damage to distance enemies, and this is doubled if the enemies are also slow, stunned, immobilized. Again, immobilized, most of our enemies will be, so then we will be getting 18% damage with Nature's Reach, so that is a very important passive for this build as well. Then moving on to your Wrath skills here, we are going to be putting 1 into Trample, and what Trample will do for us is firstly give us another source of Unstoppable, as well as a movement and utility skill for our build. So this will dash or charge us forward, dealing damage and also knocking enemies back, and then enemies that are knocked into terrain also take extra damage and are stunned. So this is just a all-round good utility skill that I think a lot of builds will be using, and this gives us our Unstoppable, our mobility, and just some of those utilities that this build is looking for. So the enhancements we will do with Trample is Trample deals additional damage, and this is just so that we can get to the Savage Trample, which means that when we cast Trample we get extra spirit, which will help us with our spirit maintenance in this build, and just being able to generate enough spirit to spam our landslides. Then once you have enough skill points after getting your key passive and your ultimate, we'll then put 3 hard points into Crushing Earth, which will deal 15% increased damage with our Earth skills to any immobilized enemies or knocked back enemies, which our Trample would give us, and the immobilize effect from our Poison Vine, or wherever else we have incorporated immobilize effects into this build. Then Safeguard will give us critical strikes with Earth skills, fortify us for 7% base life, and like we mentioned, we will be critical striking with this build a lot, so we will gain more fortification with this passive. Then, while we have Fortify for over 50% of our maximum life, our Earth skills deal 12% extra damage. So we'll put 3 ranks into each of these nodes on the Wrath part of the skill tree, because all of these increase our damage and our defenses and are based around landslide and immobilizing. So this is just a very important passive part of the Wrath tree that we are looking at. Then for our Poison Creeper, we are going to pick up Neurotoxin, which slows enemies that are poisoned from our Poison Creeper. So what Envenom will do for us, and we will put 3 ranks into here, is any enemies that are poisoned will then take 30% additional critical strike damage, which, like we mentioned, we are critically striking a lot with Landslide, so this plays into that. So looking then at our ultimate skill, we will use Petrify. So this will encase all nearby enemies in stone, stunning them for 3 seconds, which is again the CC that we are playing around. And you will deal 25% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by Petrify. So again, our critical strike damage comes into play here. And against bosses, the critical strike damage bonus is increased to 50% and its duration is increased to 6 seconds. So this again just plays into our critical strike mechanism within this build, and this is just a very powerful ultimate for this build in particular. Then our enhancements on here will be that Petrify's effect durations are increased by 1 second, which is just generally good for the skill. And then killing an enemy affected by Petrify will grant us 25 spirit. So this again will help us with spamming Landslide as much as possible and granting us extra spirit to, manage our spirit better within this build. Then for our key passives, we will be looking at Earthen Might. And this will be that lucky hits damaging enemies with Earth skill, so our Landslide has up to a 5% chance to restore all of our spirit, so again, looking at our spirit management, or cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 5 seconds. So again, making sure we critically strike as much as possible with this build. And this chance is increased by 10% for critical strikes that you do, or 10% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And again, we are immobilizing our enemies as much as possible with this build, so you will be proccing your Earthen Might very frequently. So you can see the general theme of this build of immobilizing enemies, and then through that getting big amounts of critical strikes and a lot of extra critical strike damage. Then lastly, with our extra skill points left over once we have maxed out our level for our skill points, we will put 3 into Defiance, which means our nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites, and we'll put 3 ranks into that. Then 3 into Natural Disaster, which means our earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and our basic attack will make enemies vulnerable quite often. And our storm skills, which would be our basic attack, would also do 12% increased damage against immobilized enemies, again playing into the mechanics of this build. So lastly would be Resonance, which nature skills deal 6% increased damage, and this bonus is tripled if an earth skill is the next skill cast after a storm skill. So after we use our basic attack, we will then do 18% damage with our Landslide, and that's a mechanic with Resonance here that works really well for this build. And then our last point would be Circle of Light, which means nature magic skills that consume spirit will heal us for 1% of our maximum life. So that's just a little extra bonus sort of skill left over that we'll be putting there. And that sums up our skill tree, focused around Landslide and using our Poison Creeper to immobilize enemies, as well as our Storm Strike, and having our defenses with Earthen Bulwark and our Trample, and our passive and our ultimate here are just rounding off this build nicely with all the synergies that we can find that will increase our damage and our effectiveness of Landslide. So moving on from the skill tree, I think that sums it up pretty well. We will be looking at our aspects that we will use that will really in turn make this build shine. So first off, look, starting at the top here, aspect of might, and that means that basic skills will grant us 20% damage reduction for 2 to 6 seconds. So already our basic skill of Storm Strike will already give us 25% damage reduction. Then combined with this aspect, we will be looking at 45% damage reduction after using our basic skill, which will just really toughen us up and make us super tanky in the end game. So then next we are looking at the ballistic aspect, and that means that when we have Fortify, our earth skills will gain +2 ranks. So with this, we will basically always have Fortify through the skills that we picked and the passives that we picked, and that means that our earth skills and our landslide, which our build is focused around, will always have 2 extra ranks, which will do a lot more damage. The next up aspect of the quicksand, this means that damaging enemies with our earth skills slow enemies by 25 to 50% for 5 seconds, so that's an extra CC, and also playing into the mechanics of this build again, and it's just a very useful crowd control effect from this aspect. Next up, aspect of mending stone. So this is one of my favorite aspects for the Druid, and specifically around one of the Druid's best defensive skills, which is Earthen Bulwark, and this increases our Earthen Bulwark by 6 seconds, so its 3-second regular duration is now moved up to 9 seconds. It's just so much more uptime on our Earthen Bulwark, and it really just adds to making us super tanky. So in addition to that, when we kill an enemy with Earthen skills, it replenishes an amount of your active Earthen Bulwark's barrier. So that's just another nice addition to this aspect. Then moving on to our boots here, we are going to have the Ghost Walker aspect, and that means that while we are unstoppable and for 4 seconds afterwards, we will gain 10 to 25% movement speed and can move freely through enemies. So with our trample and our Earthen Bulwark, which is already increase from our aspect of mending stone, we will have unstoppable up most of the time, which will give us an extra utility through this aspect in giving us movement speed. So then looking at the next aspect, we'll do aspect of retaliation, which means our core skills, landslide, will deal 20 to 40% increased damage based on our amount of fortify, and as we mentioned, we will have a lot of fortify on this build as well. So that mechanic just works really nicely with this build. So next up we have the Edge Masters aspect, which means that skills deal up to 10 to 20% increased damage based on the available primary resource when cast. So next is our Crash Stone aspect, and this is a very cool one because our Earth skills deal 40 to 50% more critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies, and all this build works around is CCing enemies as much as possible to gain the most critical strike damage, and this Crash Stone aspect is just absolutely perfectly suited to this build. Next up, the aspect of Trampled Earth. Now, Trample, which already is such a fantastic skill, now summons 6 landslide pillars of Earth during its duration that deal 70 to 80% normal damage, and Trample is now also a nature, magic, and earth skill. So some of our passives now will now proc the benefits and bonuses that the passives give, because Trample is now a nature, magic, and earth skill, and it will be producing 6 landslide pillars, which, tying into the whole landslide theme of this build, it just really, this is one of the most awesome aspects for you to go after for this build. Then next up, we'll look at the aspect of the Aftershock. And Landslide's Earth Pillars each strike a second time and deal an additional 6 to 12% bonus damage per hit. So this is again just boosting up our landslide damage. Again, this is just a very well suited aspect to this build. Now, looking at our skills, we'll on our skill bar, we'll have our Poison Creeper, our Trample, our Earthen Bulwark, our Petrify, Storm Strike, and then Landslide. So looking at the spirit boons that we gain being a druid, and this mechanic for the druid, for the Deer spirit boon we will be picking wariness, which means we take 10% reduced damage from elites, so that's just a nice little extra line of defense, and 10% reduced damage from elites really adds up to a lot of damage reduction. Then next up, for our Eagle boon, we will be picking Avian Wrath, which means we gain 20% critical strike damage. Again, this build focuses around critical strike, so that is just a no-brainer for your Eagle boon. Next up, for our Wolf boon, we will be picking Pack Leader, which means our critical strikes have up to 20% chance to reset the cooldown of our companion skills, which means that when we critical strike, which is all the time with this build, we will be reducing the cooldown of our Poison Creeper, which will then allow us to activate it more often and immobilize enemies more often, playing into all of the mechanics and the CC mechanics for this build. So this is again an absolute no-brainer pick for your Wolf boons. And then with that, we will be making our Wolf our favored spirit animal, and we will be picking up the Energize boon as well, which means that lucky hits dealing damage has up to a 15% chance to restore 10 spirits. So again, playing into our resource management for this build. Lastly, for our Snake boon, we will be picking up Calm Before the Storm, which means that lucky hits and on a lucky hit, nature magic skills have up to a 15% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. So if we can hit enough lucky hits with our landslides and our storm strike, we can reduce the cooldown of our ultimate and spam that, so to speak, as much as possible, which just aids our entire build. So hopefully we will be able to proc this quite often. So lastly, for this build guide, just looking at the Paragon board, looking at the legendary nodes that I think will be important for this build. Firstly, Urban Devastation, which means our Earth skills deal 30% increased damage to enemies affected by crowd control. So again, this build focuses on crowd control, so we should really be able to get a permanent 30% increased damage through this legendary node. Then next, what I think would be another good legendary node to aim for on your Paragon board would be Constricting Tendrils, which on a lucky hit with nature magic skills, you have up to a 15% chance to entangle enemies with vines, immobilizing them for 2 seconds, as well as poisoning them and dealing damage. So this will again just add more CC to the build and play into the whole mechanic, which will make us deal more damage. So overall, I think that wraps up our Landslide Druid build guide, and I think this is going to be a super powerful build for Druid and just in general out of all of the heroes in Diablo 4 come the launch on the 2nd or the 6th of June now. And this is just one of the builds that I'm excited to play with the Druid. I think a pulverized Druid could be very cool as well. It seems like a super powerful skill, and there are various ways that you can build around that. I mean, a full companion Druid would be awesome, a storm-based Druid, a full werebear, a full werewolf. There are just so many ways that you can build a Druid in the endgame for Diablo 4, and that is one of the reasons I've now switched from being a main sorcerer or sorceress to a Druid, and I think just looking at that alone also makes me a bit more excited to play the Barbarian as well. So my priorities have sort of shifted a bit, and I think just from a diversity aspect, which is kind of the main aspect that I look for in this game, I think Druid is going to fit what I want perfectly. So with that being said, I hope this video was insightful and maybe gave you some ideas for how you would build your Druid coming up to the launch now. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, maybe even consider subscribing to the channel, and we will see you again soon in the next one. Cheers.